Tunisia's political future still in doubt. The United States is calling on the country to return to its democratic path and form a new government led by a prime minister who can stabilise the economy and get a grip on the COVID pandemic. Well, President Zain declared emergency powers and assumed executive control last week, saying he was acting within the law to save the country after anti-government protests. But critics say recent arrests show his true intentions. Two lawmakers from an Islamist party that opposes the power grab were reportedly detained just a day after an independent lawmaker who accused the president of a coup was arrested. I want to bring in Safwan Masri, Executive Vice President for Global Centers and Global Development at Columbia University. He is also the author of Tunisia, an Arab anomaly, which examines why Tunisia was the only country to emerge from the Arab Spring as a democracy. Professor Masri, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, Linda.
I want to ask you, you wrote about this book, examining Tunisia as the only country to emerge from the Arab Spring as a democracy. And now, in the past week, we've seen the president sack the prime minister, freeze parliament, dismiss the judiciary. What's at stake here?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that's at stake, Linda. I mean, first and foremost, Tunisia has been on a path towards democratization over the past 10 years. As you've noted, it's the only country to have emerged from the Arab Spring, which actually started in Tunisia. It's the only one to have emerged as a democracy. I mean, we've seen what happened in Libya and Syria and Egypt, which enjoyed democracy for a couple of years, and then there was a military coup in 2013, and so on and so forth. It has not been an easy path, and Tunisia has suffered quite a bit over the past 10 years, both in terms of the democratic experiment potentially unraveling. We saw that in 2013 when civil society intervened to get it out of a political deadlock. During that past 10 years, we've seen a constitution that is unlike any other in this region adopted by the country. We have seen democratic institutions become stronger, multiple elections, both legislative as well as presidential and even municipal, peaceful transitions of power. So all of that is at risk. But at the same time, you've had stubbornness in terms of the economic malaise that was really behind the revolution that brought about the Arab Spring to begin with. That has not been dealt with.
Professor, right now there are no protests in the country. Is that because of the restrictions on gatherings of 3 or more people? Is it because of the curfews? Or is there a lack of resistance? What are your sources on the ground telling you?
So that's I mean, a very, very important question, Linda. What has been going on that's really interesting is that there's overwhelming support for what cannot be described as anything other than a coup carried out by Qais Said. He does not have the constitutional authority to carry on what he did over the past week. But the overwhelming majority of Tunisians are supporting the move, and they are actually, I mean, there is a dichotomy, if you will, between the way that Tunisians and Western media have framed what has been going on, which I think comes in part from each group's experience with democracy. The democracy that Tunisians have experienced over the past decade did include a lot of very complex power-sharing arrangements that resulted in stasis and resulted in very legitimate frustrations with the lack of economic progress. This is a country of 11 million people whose economy is in shambles. You have unemployment that is at around 18%, economy that's shrinking, people can't put food on the table. And so they're asking, what has democracy brought us? So they're supporting what the president has done.
Yeah, it certainly sounds that way from interviews I've read with people on the ground. I want to ask you about this New York Times interview with the president, who quoted former French leader Charles de Gaulle saying, "Why do you think that at 67 I would start a career as a dictator?" In that interview, the president claimed that he's going to preserve freedom of speech. Yet days after taking office, or days after claiming power, this power grab, we saw soldiers ransack the Al Jazeera TV offices there, forcing journalists out without warning. What do you think the president's plan is right now?
So, I mean, I think in my mind, there's no question about his authoritarian tendencies. We saw that when he came to power in late 2019, he immediately started working on amending the constitution to make the presidency the center of power in Tunisia. What's ironic is that, I think what he did last week was accomplish unconstitutionally what he could not accomplish constitutionally. His attempts to amend the constitution did not work. He, even as a candidate, was clearly somebody who was going to be very conservative, very stubborn, and intransigent. And as soon as he came to power, he declared his opposition to bringing equality to inheritance to women, his opposition to decriminalizing homosexuality, his support for the death penalty. So I think that he has those very strong authoritarian tendencies. But the more interesting question, I think, to ask about his move is, how is he going to resolve the economic problems for ordinary Tunisians? He is putting at risk what his ousted prime minister has been working on with the IMF, which is a $4 billion debt or loan over 3 years that would have come with a lot of strings attached, including austerity measures, cutting of subsidies, and cutting the employment in the public sector, which is the biggest form of employment in Tunisia. So he has, over the past few days, called on businesses to cut prices. He has called on banks to cut interest rates. How is he going to finance all of this? How is he going to be a man of the people who, at the same time, is going to be forced to cut jobs in the public sector? So my analysis is that he is relying on his authoritarianism being bankrolled by Gulf states who are interested in not seeing democracy thrive in any part of the neighborhood.
Well, we will be watching this closely to see how this plays out. Really great to get your analysis, Professor Safwan Masri. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Bye-bye.